Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Sam from Historic Travels and welcome to another video. And as always, before we get started today, I'd just like to take a quick moment to welcome all my new subs and to thank everybody who's been leaving me comments and messages down below. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. And if any of you out there would like to take a couple of extra steps to help support the channel a little bit more, there's a merch store and a Patreon for this channel in the links below. Thank you all so much for all your support. All right, guys, the time has finally come to continue the complete timeline series of the RMS Lusitania. When we last left the Lusitania, it was May 1st, 1915, and the ship had just departed New York City bound for Liverpool. Now, it was going to take the Lusitania roughly a week to cross the Atlantic and arrive in Liverpool. However, what everybody on board the Lusitania didn't realize was that at the exact moment the Lusitania was leaving New York, on the other side of the Atlantic, German U-boat U-20 had just left its home port and was heading to its patrol zone. And its patrol zone happened to be the area that the Lusitania would be steaming into in about 1 week's time. So, since it's going to take the Lusitania roughly a week to cross the Atlantic, what I thought we would do for this video is go ahead and jump to the other side of the Atlantic and tell a little bit of the history of U-20. Because, believe it or not, U-20 has an incredibly interesting history leading up to the point that it encountered the RMS Lusitania. And then we're going to conclude this video at the exact moment that U-20 encountered the Lusitania. And then in the next episode, we're going to talk about how U-20 eventually found the Lusitania, torpedoed it, and what events led up to the Lusitania eventually sinking after U-20 torpedoed it. Alright guys, well hey, with that out of the way, let's now tell the story of U-20, the submarine that would eventually sink the Lusitania. But before we do that, I have a quick announcement from today's sponsor. Today's episode of Historic Travels is brought to you by the LKG Craft Store on Etsy. LKG makes handmade, hand-painted wooden signs that fit a wide variety of needs. I have featured his White Star Line signs on previous episodes of Historic Travels. He just got done making a brand new series of Canard Line signs, and just like the White Star Lines before, these signs have incredible detail and craftsmanship. As I said, all of these signs are hand-painted and you will not be disappointed with these signs. He also just recently began to break into the decal business, as you can see here. If you would like to purchase one of these signs and check them out for yourselves, please click the link in the description below. Now, before we begin today's video, I do have one quick disclaimer I need to mention. The stories that I'm going to be telling you in this video are very obscure stories about U-20. And because these stories aren't easily accessible online, in fact, most of the research I did about U-20 came from the incredible book Dead Wake that talks about the final voyage of the Lusitania. And this book doesn't just talk about Lusitania, it also has a pretty detailed account of U-20. I wasn't able to find a lot of photos or pictures of U-20, so I had to improvise a little bit and show some other pictures of different U-boats to help out with the story. So if you notice a few pictures and you know, wait a minute, that's not U-20, just know that I had to improvise a little bit to give you all the content for this video, so give me a little bit of a break there. But yeah, guys, listen, I'm telling you, if you want to learn more about the Lusitania and U-20, the book Dead Wake is incredible, and I would highly recommend it. U-20 was a war submarine built and used by the Germans during the First World War. Now, U-20 was active not long after World War I began. However, we're not going to start U-20's story at that point. We're going to start U-20's story a little bit after World War I started. The date we're going to start telling U-20's story is December of 1914. The reason we're going to start telling U-20's story at that point is because on that date, U-20 got a new captain. His name was Captain Walter Schwieger, and the reason why he is so important to this story is because he was the one who was in command of U-20 on that fateful day that it encountered the Lusitania. Now, these submarines were known by a different name during the First World War. You see, these submarines were referred to as U-boats, and the reason that Germany started using these U-boats in the first place was in response to something that the British did to Germany not long after World War I broke out. You see, in the early months of the war, the British erected a massive naval blockade surrounding Germany's seaports, and the reason they did this was to try to severely limit Germany's ability to trade with other nations, and the British were hoping that this would eventually starve Germany into submission. Now, in response to this, the Germans decided to unleash a massive U-boat fleet and send them to the Atlantic, and then they were going to try to do the same thing in the Atlantic that the British were doing around the German seaports. So basically what this means is the Germans tried to have a submarine blockade right in front of the UK, and then they were going to try to intercept and sink any ships that were trying to bring supplies to the UK during this time of war.
Now, due to range limitations on U-boats at this time period, these subs didn't travel that far out into the Atlantic. They instead positioned themselves not that far off the UK coastline so they could intercept ships as they were heading to port. Now, in this map, you see an overhead view of the UK. You can see Ireland, England, and all that. You'll notice on the outer edges of the map, you'll see a light blue water, and then closer towards the UK, you'll notice a dark blue water surrounding the country. This area that's marked in the dark blue, this is the area at which the U-boats operated, and this is where they laid in wait while ships sailed in. And then once the ships crossed the border of their territory, these U-boats would try to torpedo and sink them.
Now, the fact that the British set up this naval blockade around Germany's seaports, as you can imagine, really didn't sit that well with the German military. Because what you have to remember is that while it is true that this blockade was limiting Germany's ability to get supplies from other nations, it was also hurting the average citizen who lived in Germany during this time period from buying food and other supplies. You know, they couldn't get stuff as well due to this blockade. So, as you can imagine, there were certain members of the German military who were really out for blood because of this blockade. You know, they were like, okay, the British are going to do this to us. Well, I'm going to do everything I can to hurt them. So, this would cause some U-boat captains to ignore cruiser rules. And if they saw any type of enemy ship, whether it be civilian, military, or whatever, they would go after it and try to torpedo it. This is exactly what Walter Schwieger did on U-20. Because not long after he took command of the submarine, he literally went out and sunk the first 3 ships he saw, and these were small civilian merchant ships. He saw them and he torpedoed them. U-20, under the command of Walter Schwieger, quickly got a reputation for being one of the most ruthless submarines out in the Atlantic during the First World War.
Then, around a month later, U-20 spotted another ship approaching the submarine. Schwieger dived the sub and prepared to torpedo it. Upon closer inspection, Schwieger realized that this vessel was painted white and it had red crosses painted on its hull. This identified the vessel as a hospital ship. Schwieger didn't care. He took U-20, got it into position, and fired a torpedo at the ship. Luckily, U-20 missed, and the vessel was able to escape U-20 without getting torpedoed or sunk.
Now, the fact that U-20 tried to torpedo a hospital ship really didn't sit that well with the rest of the world. I mean, it made pretty big news that U-20 attempted to sink a hospital ship. Under the cruiser rules, you know, a hospital ship, you don't target it, you know, because it's not being used for military purposes. It's trying to transport innocent people, you know. You don't target a hospital ship under any circumstances. So the fact that Schwieger would try to torpedo it, well, it didn't make Germany look too good. And honestly, even Schwieger's superiors were surprised at how ruthless Schwieger was when it came to torpedoing ships. But as far as the rest of the world was concerned, the fact that U-20 did try to torpedo a hospital ship, well, it really killed any sympathy that Germany had with the outside world due to how ruthless some of these U-boats were operating.
Now, even though Schwieger was pretty ruthless in how he fought his enemy, among the members of his crew, Schwieger was considered to be a good captain, and he also was considered to have a good sense of humor. Schwieger even traveled with his own pet dog on board the U-boat. Now, a little bit later in the war, the fact that Schwieger had his dog on board the submarine would put U-20 in a very interesting situation. I'll tell you that story right now.
Later in the war, U-20 encountered a French ship. This ship was known as the Maria De Milenos, and I apologize if I didn't say that right. But now, this attack on this ship was done in accordance with cruiser rules. Schwieger approached the ship, and then when he tried to get the ship to stop, the ship initially ran. However, Schwieger fired a couple of shots at it with U-20's deck gun, and this got the ship to stop. Schwieger waited for the crew of this ship to evacuate, and once the lifeboats were launched, Schwieger continued to fire his gun into the ship's hull. He didn't want to waste a U-boat torpedo on a ship that was stopped and just sitting there. After this vessel went down, Schwieger's crew was surveying the area at which the ship sank, and they noticed a box floating towards U-20. Inside of this box, they noticed a dog was in there. A dog had survived the sinking of the ship and was now floating inside this box that was drifting towards U-20. So U-20's crew picked up the dog and brought her aboard the submarine. Now, what you have to remember is, this dog that they rescued was female. Schwieger's dog was male, and in short order, the dog became pregnant. U-20 ended up having 4 puppies born on board this submarine. Now, Spiegel realized that having 6 dogs on one U-boat wasn't ideal, so he arranged to have a few other U-boats approach U-20, and he gave 3 of the 4 puppies to other U-boat captains. Spiegel later commented that one night while he went to sleep on the U-boat, he went to sleep with his pet dog beside him and a puppy, and then right beside him was also a torpedo.
The next story of note for U-20 occurred while the vessel was on patrol. While out at sea, Spiegel was looking through the U-20's periscope when he noticed that there were a few buoys floating in the water ahead of the submarine. Now, upon first glance, these buoys didn't seem to serve any purpose. However, Spiegel didn't see any danger, so he had U-20 continue forward. U-20 ended up passing in between these 2 buoys, and then, right after it happened, Spiegel heard a very unsettling sound coming from U-20's hull.
Spiegel said that this sound sounded like metal grinding up against metal, and he wasn't sure what was going on at first. And then he noticed that U-20's speed began to rapidly drop. And then he also noticed that the sub was slipping deeper and deeper into the water. At the time that U-20 encountered this thing, U-20 was at a depth of roughly 40 feet. And then within about 30 seconds, the sub was at 60, then 70 feet, and dropping fast. Then Spiegel realized what had just happened. Those 2 buoys that I mentioned earlier, well, they were holding up a giant steel anti-submarine net, and U-20 sailed right into it. And the purpose of these nets was to drag a submarine down to the bottom, where the sub would eventually be trapped and the crew would eventually die when the sub couldn't ascend up to the surface anymore. Now, U-20 slammed into the seafloor not long after it hit this net. However, the ocean was only around 100 feet deep in that area, so it's not like the pressure could crush the sub. Once U-20 came to rest, the crew began to try to figure out what they were going to do to free U-20. And then everybody in the sub heard a weird sound above them. A British destroyer had seen U-20 hit the net and was circling the area directly above U-20, waiting to see what would happen. Now, after a little bit of time, Spiegel ordered U-20's engines to be thrown into reverse. And believe it or not, the sub was able to work its way out of the submarine net. Now, after this happened, Spiegel ordered the sub to move ahead slow while they tried to lose this British destroyer that was up on the surface. However, something strange happened after that. Every time U-20 changed course underwater, the destroyer up on the surface matched its course. Now, what you have to remember is, this is pre-sonar and pre-depth charges. This ship had no way to attack U-20 while it was underwater, and the ship also had no way to track U-20 beneath the surface. So the question was, how was this ship following U-20? Spiegel had no idea. Then, after the sun went down, they finally lost the ship. After this happened, U-20 came up to the surface, and Spiegel saw what had happened, and he quickly realized how this ship had been following U-20. Turns out a tiny bit of the net was still caught on U-20's hull. So that means that as U-20 was sailing along the seafloor, they were literally dragging the buoys that were holding that net up in the first place with the sub. So all this destroyer had to do was follow the buoy as it was floating along the surface, and this ship knew exactly where U-20 was. It wasn't until the cover of darkness, when this ship could no longer see the buoys, that U-20 finally lost the destroyer.
Our next story with U-20 occurred on May 6, 1915. On this day, U-20 was operating off the southern coast of Ireland, and on this particular day, U-20 encountered 3 ships and managed to sink 2 of them. Now, after this happened, Spiegel was faced with a difficult decision. By this point in his patrol, U-20 was beginning to run low on both fuel and torpedoes. Now, Spiegel needed to keep a few torpedoes for the journey home, but he figured that he could spare 1 more torpedo for 1 more attack. Now, Spiegel had also been told by wireless that the Lusitania was going to be sailing into the area that U-20 was operating in within the next day or so. So, Spiegel decided to have U-20 stay in the area for 1 more day to see if they could spot the Lusitania.
On the morning of May 7, 1915, Captain Spiegel and the crew of U-20 were doing everything they could to try to spot the Lusitania before U-20 had to leave the area. While they were doing this, they spotted a military cruiser approaching U-20's position. This ship was known as the HMS Juno. Now, Spiegel dived U-20 and tried to get it into position to be able to torpedo this ship. However, the vessel was moving too fast, and the course of the Juno would make it It'd make it a very difficult target for a U-20 to hit. So Sfigure decided to not launch the torpedo unless he could get U-20 into a better position. However, that never happened. The Juno sailed right past U-20 and kept on going. Sfigure tried to follow the Juno, however, the course of the Juno and the speed of the Juno was way too fast for U-20 to keep up. After the Juno went out of range of U-20, Sfigure surfaced the sub and got very frustrated. Since he didn't think he was going to be able to find the Lusitania and the Juno had just escaped him, he began to try to plot a new course home. However, as he was doing this, his crew was still up on top of the submarine, looking around with binoculars to try to spot any other ship. And then, just before U-20 left the area, another vessel appeared on the horizon. Alright everybody, well hey, I think this is a good place to pause the Lusitania timeline series for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope this video gave you some new insight into the history of U-20. As I told you guys, U-20 has a very interesting history, and believe it or not, I didn't get to tell you guys all the stories that I wanted to about U-20 in this video. But maybe I'll tell you that story another time. Anyway guys, hey, if you like this video, be sure you leave it a like, be sure to subscribe, and make sure you tune in to the next episode when we finish up the Lusitania Complete Timeline series. Thank you all so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good day, everybody.
Special thanks to my captain level Patreon supporters, Jeffrey Clayton, Dakota Charbonneau, Moosh, and Greg Gallick. Thank you all so much for all the support.